June 28, 1942, near the Don River, southern Russia. The air was thick with the scent of oil, pine, and gunpowder. From a small makeshift airfield hidden between rows of dark birch trees, a group of young Soviet women prepared their frail wooden biplanes for takeoff. The moon was only a sliver tonight, perfect for what they were about to do. The aircraft, Polikarpov PO-2s, looked almost absurdly fragile, open cockpit trainers made of wood and canvas, their engines sputtering with a faint, uneven growl. Mechanics tightened wires, checked the bombs, 2 per plane, each no heavier than a milk can, and handed over worn leather helmets to the pilots. At the center of it all stood Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova, 20 years old, her face streaked with grease, her uniform several sizes too large. She looked skyward and exhaled through her scarf. Tonight, the night witches would fly again. Each woman knew her task by heart: fly low, cut the engine near the target, and glide silently over the German encampments before releasing the bombs, then vanish into the blackness before the enemy's searchlights could catch them. It was madness and brilliance. The Germans had radar, flat guns, and experienced pilots. The women had stealth, courage, and wooden fabric aircraft barely faster than a car. "Engine start," Popova shouted, her voice nearly swallowed by the night wind. The propellers coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life, one after another. The ground crew saluted as the first pair of biplane rattled down the grass strip. The field glowed dimly under a single lantern, before fading into the darkness as the planes lifted off, one by one, like ghosts leaving the earth. High above the steppe, the cold bit at their cheeks. The open cockpits gave no protection against the wind or the cold. Only layers of wool and sheer will kept them alive. The sky stretched endlessly before them, stars blazing in pinpoints of light. Below, the war smoldered. Convoys, camps, and columns of German troops scattered across the countryside. From her rear seat, navigator Yevdokia Bershanska adjusted instruments with frozen fingers. "Target ahead, 2 kilometers, she shouted over the wind. Popova nodded, leaning forward and killing the engine. Instantly, the rumble died. The plane slipped into silence, gliding. Only the rush of air past the wings remained. This was their signature move. The Germans called it Nachthexen, night witches. When the PO-2s descended with engines off, they made a soft whooshing sound, like the fluttering of a broomstick through the air. Soldiers below would look up in terror, hearing nothing until it was too late. The faint glow of campfires appeared below, a small German supply post near the front lines. Popova adjusted her course, heart pounding. The plane drifted silently over the treetops. Then at the last moment, she pulled the release lever. 2 small bombs dropped from the wings, whistling faintly before detonating in a burst of white flame. The earth erupted, trucks overturned, tents crumpled, and men shouted in panic. The airfield lit up with tracer rounds as German machine gunners sprayed the sky blindly. Popova banked hard, the fragile wings creaking under the strain. Searchlights pierced the darkness, sweeping violently across the clouds. "Hold on!" she yelled. A beam of light brushed the fuselage, and a burst of flak exploded nearby, the concussion rocking the plane. Wood splintered from the left strut, but the PO-2 held together. Popova dove low, almost skimming the ground, before reigniting the engine. The sputtering roar returned, propelling them toward the safety of night. Behind them, another PO-2 glided through the same inferno, its pilot, Irina Sabrova, releasing her bombs before twisting into a desperate climb. The sky was alive with streaks of fire and black smoke, but somehow, impossibly, all the women made it through. As dawn crept across the horizon, the squadron landed one by one, engines stuttering to a halt. The ground crew cheered softly, waving their arms as the pilots dismounted. Faces blackened, lips cracked from cold, but eyes alight with triumph. Popova pulled off her helmet, shaking the frost from her hair. "That's one for Rostov," she said quietly, her voice trembling with fatigue and pride. The night witches had struck again. And in the days to come, their legend would spread across the front lines, through German camps, whispered in fear by soldiers who could not comprehend how these wooden ghosts could strike with such deadly precision.
The night after their successful raid near Rostov, the airfield buzzed with quiet celebration, but beneath the laughter and steaming cups of tea, every woman knew what awaited them tomorrow. Another mission, another night against impossible odds. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment, as it was officially known, was unlike any other in the Soviet Air Force. Every pilot, navigator, and mechanic was a woman, most barely out of their teens, handpicked by Marina Roskova, the famous Soviet aviator known as the Soviet Amelia Earhart. Roskova had fought tooth and nail to convince Stalin to let women fly in combat. Now the women she'd gathered were proving her right, one harrowing mission at a time. At their hidden base near Engels, the regiment trained relentlessly. Their aircraft, the Polikarpov PO-2, was laughably outdated even by 1930 standards. A wooden frame covered with canvas, with no radio, no armor, and a top speed barely reaching 150 kilometers per hour. Yet its simplicity became its greatest strength. German radar often ignored them, dismissing the PO-2 as agricultural planes or weather anomalies. And because the aircraft could take off and land almost anywhere, the Night Witches could strike from improvised fields deep behind the front lines. Their training was brutal. The women practiced flying in complete darkness, often cutting engines mid-air to learn how to glide silently toward a target. They learned to judge distance not by instruments, but by instinct, by the way the horizon glowed, by how the treetops blurred beneath them. Many crashed in training, their light planes crumpling under crosswinds or collapsing on rough landings, but those who survived became masters of stealth. The airfield itself was a scene of constant motion. Young women in flight suits rolled bombs into position, checked fuel lines, and patched bullet holes in the fragile wings using whatever materials they could find. Their uniforms were second-hand, often taken from fallen male pilots, and most of their boots didn't fit. Still, the laughter and determination never faltered. They painted flowers, stars, and personal symbols on their planes, acts of defiance in a world of death and steel.
By mid-1943, their missions had become a nightly ritual of exhaustion and bravery. Each pilot flew up to 15 sorties per night, sometimes landing only to refuel and reload before taking off again. The Germans came to dread the whispering sound of the PO-2s, claiming the witches used black magic to see in the dark. Some even believed that shooting one down would bring a curse. But the truth was far grimmer than superstition. It was precision and courage. On one moonless night over the Kuban River, Lieutenant Yevdokia Rachkevich led a three-plane formation toward a heavily defended German ammunition depot. The flak was relentless. Shells burst like thunder around them. Rachkevich's PO-2 wove through tracer fire, her navigator Nina Ulyanenko counting seconds to release. At the signal, Rachkevich cut the engine and they slipped into silence, the night air whistling through the struts. Below, the Germans scrambled, searchlights clawing upward. A white cone of light caught one of the planes. It was Junior Lieutenant Vera Bellick's. Caught in the beam, Bellick had no choice. "They see me," she yelled into the wind, then dove sharply, releasing her bombs in a desperate final maneuver. The explosions below tore through the depot in a chain reaction, lighting up the valley like day. When the glare faded, Bellick's plane was gone, shot down, its wooden frame burning in the darkness. The surviving pilots returned in silence that night. Popova helped carry the news to Bellick's bunk. Her bed still made, her gloves still folded neatly by the pillow. No tears came. They had no time to mourn. Another mission awaited before dawn. Every sortie took a toll. The cold froze their fingers to the controls, the wind cut through their flight suits, and exhaustion dulled their senses. But the Night Witches kept flying, each mission a statement of defiance, and each silent glide a reminder that the Soviet Union would not yield. By late 1943, the 588th had become a legend across both fronts. German soldiers posted signs warning, "Beware of the Night Witches. You can't hear them, you can't see them, but they see you."
By the winter of 1943, the legend of the Night Witches had spread across the Eastern Front like smoke. To the Germans, they were supernatural, creatures who descended silently from the stars, dropping death before vanishing into the blackness. To the Soviets, they were heroes, but to themselves, they were simply survivors. Snow crested the ground around their makeshift base near Taman, a region of frozen mud and fire. The cold was merciless. Frost formed on the control wires, breath turned to ice crystals inside their scarves, and the canvas wings stiffened mid-air from the chill. Yet the sorties never stopped. If the Germans advanced, the women flew. If supplies ran low, they scavenged parts, fuel, and rations from abandoned depots. The 588th lived on discipline, ingenuity, and an unbreakable bond. Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova, now a veteran of dozens of missions, walked between the snow-dusted aircraft one morning, inspecting bullet holes and worn struts. She paused beside the fuselage of her PO-2, running a gloved hand along the wooden frame. "Old girl," she murmured softly, "one more night." Her navigator, Yevdokia Bershanskaya, approached with a half-frozen mug of tea. "You said that yesterday," she said with a faint smile. Popova chuckled. "And I'll say it tomorrow too." That night, the mission was simple on paper. Bomb a German fuel convoy near Novorossiysk. But nothing about the war was simple anymore.
The Germans had begun deploying mobile flak batteries, fast-moving trucks that could fire bursts of anti-aircraft shells into the darkness. Every flight became a dance between silence and sudden death. At 1 a.m., Popova's plane lifted off, the propeller slicing through mist. The Po-2 climbed sluggishly, its small engine protesting the weight of 2 bombs and 2 exhausted women. The world below was an endless sea of black. Only the faint glow of distant fires marked the front line. "Target at 5 kilometers," Brushanskaya whispered, tracing her map under the dim red light. Popova nodded and throttled back, letting the engine fade. The wind howled softly past their faces as the biplane began its glide. The ground rose beneath them, dark shapes of trucks, men, and ammunition crates forming against the faint white of snow. "Now," Popova whispered. 2 bombs fell, tumbling silently through the air before erupting in a chain of fire. The convoy was engulfed, barrels burst, flames licked at tires, and German soldiers scattered in confusion. But their triumph lasted seconds. A column of tracer fire ripped upward from the tree line. Brushanskaya gasped as rounds tore through the wing fabric. "Hang on," Popova shouted, wrenching the stick. The Po-2 shuddered, the right wing fluttering dangerously. They skimmed treetops, the plane barely holding altitude. The flak grew distant, but so did the airfield. For a long minute, there was only the hum of the wounded engine and the pounding of their hearts. They made it back just before dawn. Mechanics rushed forward, helping them from the cockpit. Popova's hands were stiff, her face pale from the cold. She looked at the shredded wing and laughed, a dry, trembling laugh. "She flew," she said simply. In the mess tent, the women gathered around a flickering kerosene lamp, eating thin soup from metal cups. The air smelled of smoke, oil, and damp wool. Someone started humming a folk tune, and one by one, voices joined in. For a moment, the war felt far away. They were sisters, united not by blood, but by survival. Then came the letter. Commander Yevdokia Brushanskaya, their leader, and the only officer with the same name as Popova's navigator, read it aloud. It was from the High Command. For exemplary courage and repeated success in night bombing operations, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment is hereby redesignated as the 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment. The women cheered, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. They had earned the title Guards, a distinction reserved for elite Soviet units. But behind every smile was the quiet knowledge that the hardest days were still ahead. The Germans had learned, their patrols grew sharper, their traps deadlier, and the Night Witches would soon face missions that would push them beyond even their legendary courage. By spring 1943, the newly christened 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment stood at the center of one of the fiercest campaigns on the Eastern Front, the siege of the Kuban bridgehead. The Germans had dug in deep along the Black Sea coast, fortified by anti-aircraft batteries and searchlights that turned the night sky into a killing ground. For the Night Witches, it was hell itself, a place where one wrong move meant fire, steel, and oblivion. April 17, 1943, the air was thick with the smell of cordite and the dull roar of distant artillery. At their forward field near the Kuban River, the women moved quickly, wrapping scarves around their faces against the cold wind. Mechanics worked under lantern light, tightening bolts and patching torn fabric. The Po-2 stood ready, fragile silhouettes against a burning horizon. Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova reviewed her map one last time. Their orders were simple but deadly. Bomb a German ammunition dump near the front. "We go in pairs," she told her pilots. "No radios, no hesitation. In and out." Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed the fatigue of too many sleepless nights. The first planes took off, engines sputtering like whispers in the dark. The sky was heavy with smoke from the burning fields below, the ground a shifting mosaic of firelight and shadow. Popova's Po-2 climbed through the haze, her navigator Yevdokia Brushanskaya adjusting bearings by the flicker of a red map lamp. "We're flying blind," she said quietly. Popova nodded. "Then trust the stars." As they neared the target, the German defenses awoke. Beams of light sliced upward, flak bursting like black flowers around them. The Po-2 twisted through the chaos, each movement slow but deliberate. Unlike faster aircraft, their biplanes couldn't outrun fire, only evade it through cunning and silence. Popova cut her engine, and the world fell into stillness. Below, the ammunition dump glowed faintly. The women glided through the searchlights, their planes nearly invisible against the night sky. Popova released her bombs, 2 perfect drops. The earth below erupted, fire sweeping outward in a violent plume. "Direct hit," she shouted, but there was no time to celebrate. The shockwave hit them seconds later, tossing the light aircraft like a leaf in a storm.
Popova fought the stick, teeth clenched, as shrapnel shredded the air around them. A fragment tore through the fuselage, splintering the wooden ribs. "We're hit," she cried. Popova throttled forward, the engine sputtering, coughing smoke. They limped through the sky, the sound of metal and wood groaning beneath them. Behind them, Junior Lieutenant Irina Sebrova's plane was not so lucky. A direct flak burst struck her tail, spinning her into the darkness. No parachutes opened. Popova saw the faint glow of fire far below and whispered, "Goodbye, Irina." There was no time for tears. When the survivors landed hours later, the airfield was silent. No one spoke as mechanics helped the battered planes to a halt. Popova climbed down, covered in oil and soot. Her plane was riddled with holes, yet somehow it had returned. Commander Brashanskaya met her at the wing, her expression both proud and grave. "You brought them home," she said quietly. That night, around the campfire, the women drank weak tea and mended uniforms by lamplight. They spoke little, but every silence was heavy with unspoken grief. One of the navigators began to hum softly, an old Russian lullaby. One by one, the others joined in, their voices blending with the wind. The Night Witches had lost many, but their missions continued. Night after night, they took to the skies, carrying their bombs and their courage across a war-torn world. They grew used to the rhythm of death, to the creak of wings, the hiss of air, the soft thud of boots on frozen ground. Each mission was a gamble, but they no longer feared it. By the end of the Cuban campaign, the regiment had flown over 10,000 sorties. The Germans were driven back, their positions shattered under the relentless attacks of the silent witches. But for every victory, there was a grave dug in frozen soil. Popova looked over the rows of crosses at the edge of the field one dawn, frost gleaming faintly on the wood. "We fly for them," she whispered, "for the ones who can't."
By summer 1944, the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Regiment was no longer just a legend whispered among Soviet ranks, it was a nightmare etched into German briefings. Their name appeared in radio intercepts and tactical memos circled in red ink: Nachthexen, the Night Witches, the women who made the night scream. June 22, 1944, Operation Bagration, the massive Soviet offensive to retake Belarus, was underway. From the forests east of Minsk, the Night Witches' airfield was hidden beneath camouflage netting and branches. The scent of pine and fuel thickened the air. The sun had barely set when Captain Nadezhda Popova walked between the rows of PO2s, running her hand across the canvas wings like a ritual. Each plane bore scars from past missions, patched holes, faded paint, bullet grooves along the struts. They were relics, yet alive, bound together by the women who refused to quit. At briefing, Major Yevdokia Bersanskaya, now the regiment's commanding officer, laid out the night's objective: German supply convoys moving through the marshlands. She said, "They'll be hiding in the dark. So will we." A ripple of grim laughter followed. The crews loaded their 100-kilogram bombs by hand, sweat and grime streaking their faces. Navigators secured compass lights, pilots checked fuel lines. The air hummed with nervous energy. "Tonight," Popova told her navigator, "we fly low, below the treetops if we have to." By midnight, the first wave lifted off, 32 PO2s in total. Engines coughed and roared against the night sky before fading into the distance. Once airborne, the world shrank to moonlight, mist, and the steady pulse of the engine. Below them, Belarus was a patchwork of shadow and flame, villages burning, rivers gleaming faintly like glass under the stars. Popova and her navigator, Sergeant Tatiana Baramzina, flew at treetop height, weaving between black shapes of forest and power lines. The map was useless now, only instinct guided them. When they spotted the glint of metal on the road, a convoy of trucks, Popova cut the throttle. The engine died to silence, and the PO2 slipped into a gliding dive. From the ground, German soldiers never saw them coming. A faint rustle, a whisper in the wind, then the sharp whistle of bombs falling. The explosion ripped through the convoy, lighting the marshes in orange flame. Trucks overturned, ammunition detonated, and chaos spread. By the time German gunners raised their weapons, the Night Witches had already disappeared into the clouds. But the danger was never one-sided. On the return leg, searchlights swept the horizon and tracer fire cut the night. One burst clipped their right wing, splintering the frame. Popova gritted her teeth, forcing the plane to stay level. "Hold her steady," Baramzina shouted over the wind. Popova didn't answer. She was counting heartbeats, gauging altitude by instinct. When they finally cleared the last barrage, both women exhaled, trembling. They landed just before dawn. The airfield was quiet except for the cough of engines and the murmurs of ground crews. Popova climbed down, covered in oil and ash. Bersanskaya met her with a nod. "You hit them," she said, "hard." Popova smiled faintly. "Then we'll do it again tonight." In the following weeks, the regiment flew more than 800 sorties during the Belarus campaign. They targeted bridges, fuel dumps, and troop positions, often flying up to 15 missions in a single night. Their stamina defied logic. Some women slept between flights with their heads on bomb crates. Others mended wings or sewed new flight suits from scraps of canvas. And yet, amidst exhaustion, there was pride. They had become symbols, not just of resistance, but of possibility. Girls who had once milked cows or studied literature were now the most feared bomber pilots on the Eastern Front. Still, the cost was unrelenting. On July 18th, during a raid near Grodno, Lieutenant Raisa Aronova's plane was hit. Witnesses saw her try to guide it away from the convoy below before it exploded midair. There was nothing left to recover. That night, the women flew again, their faces set as stone. The war gave no time for mourning. As August came, the Germans retreated westward, and the night witches followed. Every new airfield brought the same routine: mud, danger, and sleepless nights. But now whispers of victory began to stir in the ranks. The tide was turning. Popova looked west one morning, the sun rising over the smoldering horizon. Soon, she said softly, we'll be flying over Berlin.
Winter had returned to Eastern Europe with a vengeance. The front lines had surged westward, and the night witches, the battle-worn 46 Taman Guards, followed close behind, setting up operations on frozen fields barely reclaimed from German hands. The year was 1945, and though the end of the war was near, every mission carried the same deadly uncertainty as their first. January 17th, 1945. The airfield near Legnica, Poland, was a patch of ice and mud under a gray, moonless sky. The Polikarpov Po-2s stood in rows, their wooden frames coated in frost, their engines wrapped in canvas to keep them from freezing. The women moved quietly, their breath visible in the frigid air. Frost crackled under boots, the distant sound of artillery rolled like thunder from the Western Front. Captain Nadezhda Popova, now a legend among her comrades, inspected her aircraft under a dim lantern. Her fingers, raw and cold, traced the patchwork scars along the fuselage. Each dent told a story, each patch a survival. One more night, she whispered to herself, though she had said those words too many times to count. Nearby, Major Yevdokia Bershanskaya briefed her remaining pilots inside a drafty command tent. The target? A German logistics hub near the Oder River, heavily defended and critical to the Wehrmacht's retreat. We strike at 0100 hours, she said. No moon tonight. They won't see you coming. But if they do, make sure they remember who you are. The women exchanged thin smiles. They had flown through every conceivable peril: searchlights, flak bursts, sub-zero temperatures, but the idea of stopping before Berlin was unthinkable. This was their war, too. Engines sputtered to life across the field. The propellers stirred snow into swirling clouds as the first aircraft took off, climbing slowly into the darkness. Inside the cockpit, Popova's face was lit by the dim red glow of the instrument panel. Her navigator, Irina Sebrova, adjusted her scarf and leaned over the map. We crossed the Oder in 10 minutes, she said softly. Winds strong from the west. They flew low, so low, the tips of pine trees brushed the undercarriage. The cold bit into their faces, the air thin and sharp. Below them, the land was a vast patchwork of ruined towns and frozen rivers, faint fires flickering like dying stars. As they neared the target zone, Popova throttled down. The Polikarpov Po-2's engine coughed and went silent. Now only the rush of wind filled the night. They glided, in perfect darkness, invisible to radar, inaudible until it was too late. Beneath them, the German camp glimmered faintly, rows of trucks, fuel tanks, and tents surrounded by snow. Popova gave a nod. Sebrova pulled the release lever. 2 small bombs dropped away, tumbling silently before the first explosion lit the night sky. The ground below erupted in chaos. Searchlights flicked on, beams stabbing into the heavens. Tracer rounds ripped through the air. "Hold steady," Popova shouted, gripping the controls as flak bursts blossomed dangerously close. Shrapnel tore a hole in the left wing. The plane shuddered, but she kept it level. "We're hit. Can you see it?" Sebrova called out. "Still flying," Popova said through clenched teeth. They banked hard, engine roaring back to life, slipping between searchlight beams as if dancing through them. For a brief second, a German spotlight caught them fully, illuminating the frail wooden biplane and the 2 young women at its controls. Gunners opened fire. Popova dove, the wind howling as tracer fire stitched the night sky above them. They escaped by inches,
disappearing once more into the darkness. Behind them, the German depot burned bright against the snow. "That's one less bridge for them to cross," Sebrova said, a rare smile breaking through her exhaustion. Popova just nodded. She knew how close they'd come. When they landed at dawn, the field was half buried in frost. Ground crews rushed to meet them, breath steaming in the cold. Bershanskaya herself was waiting. "You made it," she said simply. Popova climbed down, her boots sinking into the snow. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the cold and the weight of everything that had come before. In the following weeks, the regiment flew over 1,000 final sorties, supporting the Red Army's advance into Germany. They bombed convoys, rail lines, and pockets of resistance, until at last, the word they had all dreamed of came down the line. Berlin had fallen. May 9th, 1945, Victory Day. The war was over. The women stood together on a field near the Elbe River, their Po-2s parked in a ragged line behind them. They were gaunt, sunken-eyed, their uniforms patched and oil-stained, but they were alive. Popova looked towards the western horizon, where the smoke still hung heavy over Europe. "We did it," she said quietly. Beside her, Sebrova nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. "We did what they said we couldn't." The Night Witches had flown more than 23,000 missions, dropped more than 3,000 tons of bombs, and earned 23 Hero of the Soviet Union medals among their ranks. Their planes were obsolete, their resources minimal, but their courage limitless. They had turned the night itself into a weapon, and though the world would change and time would pass, the whisper of their wings would never fade from history.